So the next group of plants we're going to look at are the seedless vascular plants. Remember, so all of the rest of the branches are vascular. So this means we're going to start to see true roots and true vascular tissue. And these two have seeds, which means that these are the seedless vascular plants. And we've got two main lineages here, and they're going to share some common characteristics that are going to come right here. We now have a dominant sporophyte generation. We're going to start to see vascular tissue. We're going to see true roots and leaves as a result of that vascular tissue, and then some sporophylls, which are some variations on spore-releasing plants. So now we can see a life cycle where the large and lasting plant is actually the sporophyll generation. So this is a fern. So imagine if you go in your backyard, I have some ferns out there. The big leafy fronds that you're seeing on the fern, now this is the sporophyte, which is 2N, which is diploid. On the underside of the fern, so you can go check your ferns and see if they're reproducing, they form these little sporophylls called sorus, which produce the sporangium. So these little tiny organs there for the sporangium will go through meiosis and release these haploid spores. That spore is going to grow into a multicellular body called a gametophyte. But now, instead of being a large body, this gametophyte is very small. So if you go check your ferns and you can see that they're reproducing sexually, you might see these gametophytes, but these would be super teeny tiny. And they might be a little bit above the surface, or they might even be below the surface of the dirt. And on here we've got the male antheridium and the female archegonium, and the sperm have to transfer from one to the other. And so that means that this gametophyte still needs to be in a wet or moist environment. They're going to develop a zygote after fertilization inside of now the female gametophyte, and that's going to grow into a new sporophyte plant and eventually look like the big bushy ferns. We're starting to see true vascular tissue. So xylem conducts water, and it usually goes up from the roots. Phloem is going to distribute sugars and other organic products, typically going down from the leaves to the other cells of the plant. So I always like to remember xylem goes up and phloem goes down. A lot of these water conducting cells are also strengthened by lignin, which is what makes them woody and strong, helps provide structural support. So now that I've got xylem and phloem and a lot more structural support, a lot of these can grow into really large trees. And that produces an advantage for that plant because it can be taller than the plants around it, which means it can get more access to sunlight, carbon dioxide, and it can also release its spores further, so it can spread out its spores wider and wider. As a result of vascular tissue, we see the evolution of true roots. So back in the bryophytes, they only had rhizoids. Now we're going to start to see true roots that are able to absorb water and nutrients, as well as true leaves that are going to have vascular tissue for moving the products of photosynthesis around. There's two different types of leaves. Micro means small, phyll means plant. So these microphyls typically have one kind of spine-shaped leaf with a single vein. These are only found in the lycophytes. All other plants have megaphylls, which are typically larger leaves, and they have a branched vascular system. Seedless vascular plants also start to show modified spore variations. So a sporophyll is a leaf with sporangia. So if you see a fern, here's my fern, they will have these dots on the bottom of their leaves called sori that are full of sporangia. Some plants use cone-like structures called strobili that are also formed from a group of sporophylls. Most seedless vascular plants are homosporous, so this means homo means the same, spore. So they produce one type of spore that develops into a bisexual gametophyte. So we saw that on the little fern gametophyte, where they had an antheridia that produces male gametes, and they had an archegonia that produces female gametes. So this is bisexual, meaning that it's got both of these gametophytes on it, and then the sperm move from one to the other. Seed plants, however, so the gymnosperms and the angiosperms, are going to be heterosporous, meaning that they produce specifically male microspores and female megaspores. There are two main groups of seedless but vascular plants. The first being the lycophyta, so we believe these are the first to diverge, and these have microphyls, so you can see these kind of spine-shaped leaves here. Those are the microphyls. These believe lived in moist swamps about 300 to 250 million years ago. Around this time, the planet started to become drier, and as a result, the moist environment started to decline. And so as the planet became warmer, as the planet became cooler and drier throughout the Permian, the presence of these groups tended to decline because they relied heavily on water to distribute the sperm. The other clade of vascular seedless plants is called Manilophyta. These, we believe, are sister to the seed plants, so more closely related to the seed plants. Amongst these are ferns, typically the most widespread group. These are common in Florida, so if you go look outside and walk around, you'll probably see many ferns. You can see the little fiddleheads here, representing a young fern sporophyte. Another group within here are called the horsetails. So Equistem is the only genus left of the horsetails, and they look kind of like the tail of a horse. And then the whisk ferns, which are ancestral, but they are actually closely related to modern ferns. So this is a whisk fern over here. So during the Devonian and the Carboniferous period of the history of Earth, there was a wide diversity of really tall ferns and horsetails that lived in these large swampy environments. But as the planet got drier, what happened is the globe cooled down and glaciers started to form, and the planet got drier. And as it did, there wasn't as much water and swampy areas available for these big lycophytes and the manilophytes, and so they started to disappear because they relied on that water for reproduction. The roots of these big trees also create acid that breaks down rocks into calcium and magnesium in the soil, and then those elements can react with carbon dioxide in rain and form rocks in the water. And so as those rocks form in the water, they're removing carbon dioxide from the air. So the lycophytes and the manilophytes of the Carboniferous period actually helped to remove carbon from the air and became compacted underneath the soil, at first as peat and then eventually as coal with a lot of pressure. And so a lot of our coal deposits now are remnants of these lycophyte seedless vascular plants from the Carboniferous and the Devonian periods. And so now as we dig up the coal in coal mines and burn it for fuel, we're taking the carbon that they stored under the ground and releasing it back into the atmosphere, which is now increasing the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and warming the planet back up.